Pages today is titled Heaven and Hell, and it's from the book Comfortable with Uncertainty by Buddhist author Pema Chodron. A big burly samurai comes to a Zen master and says, "Tell me the nature of heaven and hell." The Zen master looks him in the face and says, "Why should I tell a scruffy, disgusting, miserable slob like you? A worm like you, do you think I should tell you anything?" Consumed by rage, the samurai draws his sword and raises it to cut off the master's head. The Zen master says, "That is hell." Instantly, the samurai understands that he has just created his own hell, black and hot, filled with hatred, self-protection, anger, and resentment. He sees that he was so deep in hell that he was ready to kill someone. Tears filled his eyes as he put his palms together to bow in gratitude for this insight. The Zen master says, "That is heaven." The Buddhist belief is not that hell is bad and heaven is good, or get rid of hell and just seek heaven. Instead, we encourage ourselves to develop an open heart and an open mind to heaven, to hell, to everything. With this kind of equanimity, we can realize that no matter what comes along, we're always standing in the middle of sacred space. With equanimity, we can see that everything that comes into our circle has come to teach us what we need to know. My prayer this morning is from my personal daily devotional, The Daily Word, and it was from November the 30th of last year, and it's titled Resilience. Please close your eyes or center yourself in whatever way that works for you as we enter into a time of prayer and meditation. Infinite Spirit, ground of all being, to that which each of us deems holy and worthy of worship. Life is about perspective. Sometimes I feel I'm sailing smooth waters, and sometimes I feel I'm bobbing in waves, just keeping my head above the surface. In these times I pray, keeping my mind and heart attuned to the universe within. My soul rises. I am buoyant and able to ride the waves of life. If I find myself resisting change, I remember I am able to adapt to shifting circumstances and rediscover my peace. I keep my life in perspective. I have the power to make everything that happens in my life be for my good. I am strong yet flexible. I live lightly. I bounce back from disappointment. My life experiences, both good and bad, strengthen my resolve and enrich my outlook. Amen and Namaste. I was about 10 years old. My dad had taken me and my mother fishing at Lake Sam Rayburn in East Texas. We were in a small 12-foot flat-bottom boat with an equally small 10-horsepower motor. I don't know why, but it seems like my dad always rowed out a long way from wherever we launched a boat to where we would end up fishing. On this particular day, he took us out several miles, an awfully long way. But it was a beautiful day and a pleasant ride on calm waters to where we fished for several hours. Then things began to change because we could see the storm clouds gathering. My dad cranked up the motor and we headed back. We didn't get far before the waves got bigger and Daddy began to hug the shoreline as much as possible, hoping to avoid the open water and the much larger waves. Unfortunately, closer to shore was also where all the hidden stumps were lurking, just beneath the surface. The propeller would hit one of the stumps, and the force of the blow would shear a pin, stopping us right where we were, with waves lapping on all sides of the boat. Daddy would raise the propeller, change a pin, and then we'd head out again till we'd hit another stump, and Daddy would repeat the procedure all over again. This happened several times with the waves getting higher and higher, and Mama and I getting more and more frightened. I remember praying a lot and being very scared. After what seemed like an eternity, we finally made it back to where we had launched the boat, and we were all safe and sound again. As I look back, that boating adventure was actually a good metaphor for life, and my only real option was to go with the flow. The day started off very pleasant, followed by hours of mindless activities, which led to problems and fears, and concluded with arrival back to a place of calm and safety. And just like that day, we often have simple plans for our days, and those plans get sidetracked by the problems we face. And some of those problems result in fears, sometimes for our very survival. But before we know it, the fears are resolved and we're back to where we started or some similar place. A challenge in life is to go with the flow, whatever the flow happens to be, because there's nothing we can actually do about most of the flow going on all around us. The only thing for certain is that we can change our reactions and responses to the flow based on our particular options at the time. Through the centuries, philosophers and religious teachers have shared their wisdom in an effort to help us go with the flow of life. And I plan to share some of those strategies today. The saying, "This too shall pass," is one of those pieces of wisdom, and it probably came out of Persia, and it reflects the temporary nature of the human condition, that neither the negative nor the positive moments in life will last forever. The general sentiment of the saying is found in wisdom literature throughout history and across cultures, but the specific phrase, "This too shall pass," probably originated in the writings of medieval Persian Sufi poets. You might hear that phrase again today. One thing we often search for in life is a little peace and tranquility, or maybe just an enjoyable pastime. For my dad, fishing was one of those pastimes. And on that day, that's exactly what my dad was looking for, a little peace of mind while fishing. Marcus Aurelius is considered one of the great philosopher kings. He was emperor of the Roman Empire for 19 years. During his reign, he fought several wars, dealt with a devastating plague which killed as many as 10 million people, and during his marriage, he lost 9 of his 14 children. I have no doubt he too probably wanted to get away at times and escape all the ongoing and ever-present turmoil. But that's not how he chose to escape. And this is what he wrote in his own journal, now available to us in the book Meditations. He said, "People try to find retreats for themselves in the countryside, by the sea, and in the mountains. A marked longing for such a retreat has been a habit of yours too." Let me pause here to remind you. This was his journal, and when he says yours too, he was referring to himself. So I'll repeat what he wrote to himself. "A marked longing for such a retreat has been a habit of yours too. But nothing could be more unphilosophical, given that you may retreat into yourself whenever you want. There's no retreat more peaceful and untroubled than a man's own mind. And this is especially true of a man who has inner resources, which are such that he has only to dip into them to be entirely untroubled and composed. So never stop allowing yourself to retreat into your own mind. Make sure your inner resources are concise and fundamental to you, so that when you need to retreat, they are sufficient to wash away every vexation in your life. Yes, there are many ways to find a little peace and tranquility. On a fishing trip, like my dad loved, or within our own minds, as Marcus Aurelius reminds us. This retreat is available to all of us, anytime and anywhere. But even with brief or expanded periods of relaxation or peace, this too shall pass, because change is a constant fixture in our lives. And on that eventful fishing trip, things changed. We started having problems, and as I mentioned earlier, a storm came up. And as we tried to escape the storm, the propeller kept shearing a pin. One clear memory I have of that day is that my dad never panicked. He just kept addressing and fixing the problem. Every day we're faced with problems, many of which we are perfectly able to handle all by ourselves. We either have the specific training, or the problems are relatively simple things we've learned to manage. But with major problems, especially emergency or a crisis, proper training or experience is essential to be able to go with the flow of the crisis at the moment. And yes, sometimes we need to go with the flow, especially during a crisis. Theodore Roosevelt said, "What such a man needs is not courage, but nerve control, cool-headedness. This he can only get with practice." Similarly, one Stoic philosopher said, "Would you have a great empire? Then rule over yourself." Yes, rule over yourself and your emotions, especially during a crisis. These individuals inspired a modern-day philosopher, Ryan Holiday. And in his book, The Obstacle is the Way, Holiday wrote, "Before the first launch, NASA recreated the fateful day for the astronauts over and over, step by step, hundreds of times, from what they'd have for breakfast to the ride to the airfield. They did it so many times that it became as natural and familiar as breathing. They'd practice all the way through, holding nothing back but the liftoff itself, making sure to solve for every variable and remove all uncertainty." Holiday believes that uncertainty and fear are relieved by experience, and proper training creates that experience. With enough practice, you erase your fears that are bred mostly from unfamiliarity. Fortunately, unfamiliarity is simple to fix, which makes it possible to increase our tolerance for stress and uncertainty. Thus, the question for astronauts was not how skilled a pilot they were, but how could they keep calm? How could they fight the urge to panic and instead focus on what they could change with any given problem? Life for us is really no different. If you have the skills and training to solve a problem, then solve it. If some new training would help with some specific problem, well, then get the training. And if none of that is possible and you don't have the necessary skills, you'll probably need to trust other individuals who do have the training to solve your problems and handle your crises, like medical professionals and emergency responders. On the other hand, don't be fooled by Mr. Google and the internet. A few internet searches aren't going to replace the years of academic training and actual practice all of the real professionals have undergone. Even so, obstacles often make us emotional, and the only way we will survive or overcoming them is by keeping our emotions in check and keeping them steady no matter what happens, no matter how much events may change. It's the kind of calm that comes with the absence of irrational or extreme emotions. Not the loss of feeling altogether, just the loss of the harmful, unhelpful kind. Don't let the negativity in. Don't let those emotions even get started. Just say, no, thank you. I can't afford to panic, and I won't. Unfortunately, we often get frustrated or even angry when our plans are derailed due to something breaking or going wrong, especially with problems we're definitely not trained or equipped to handle by ourselves. When this happens, you can either go with the flow and seek out help for your particular problem, or you can thrash around angrily, which seldom does any good whatsoever. Often, we don't have the humility to admit we are in over our heads and that we actually need help from someone else. Don't be like that. Admit when you need help and then either ask for it or seek it out. That too is going with the flow. And you may even find some peace of mind in the process. Which reminds me of one of my other favorite sayings. Peace. It doesn't mean to be in a place where there is no noise, trouble, or hard work. It means to be in the midst of those things and still to be calm in your heart. But when a problem arises, remember one thing. This too shall pass. The final aspect of that fishing trip I want to address is what I remember most, and that was that I was afraid, very afraid. Often while we're going along in the flow of life, something happens which leads us to be fearful. There's no one way to deal with fear, and every situation is unique. You may or may not have the requisite skills to deal with something that scares you. There will likely be many factors which you have little or no control over. Like approaching storms or devastating medical conditions. But the reality is that you are scared. On that fishing trip, there was absolutely nothing I could do. I had to trust in my dad's skills to get us back safely. I had to sit back and weather the storm. But Mom and I also prayed. I don't believe in intercessory prayer, which is asking some deity to intercede on my behalf. But prayer also offers us something else. It offers us an opportunity to focus on something other than what's causing us to be afraid. And it can help us ride out the storm when there is truly nothing we can do. So pray if that helps calm your fears. Excuse me. Biologists have discovered that when we're afraid, something often kicks in, and they call it fight or flight. But a more realistic approach is fight, flight, or freeze. When freezing is your only option, that is doing nothing, prayer or meditation may be exactly what you need to do in the moment. Author Frank Hebert, in his Dune science fiction books, offers us some very good wisdom regarding fear. In the books, several of his characters use the following phrase to help them through fearful situations. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings obliteration. I will face my fear and I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is gone, I will turn my inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. And I believe that's true. Fear is the mind killer. And when it has passed, we will still be there. We can endure and we can survive fear. Without a doubt, sometimes our instincts will prompt us to respond to some fear with either fight or flight. But in our modern society, most often, we must simply endure what is causing us to be fearful. You may not like what I'm about to share, but I believe it to be true for many of our modern day fears. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron, in her book, Comfortable with Uncertainty, writes, "The central question of our training is not how we avoid uncertainty and fear, but how we relate to its discomfort. How do we deal with the unpredictable encounters of an ordinary day? For those of us who hunger to know the truth, painful emotions are like flags going up that say, 'You are stuck.' With regard to fear and other stressful emotions, such uncomfortable feelings are messages that tell us to perk up and lean into a situation when we'd rather cave in and back off or just run away. When those flags go up, we have a unique opportunity. We can stay with the painful emotion instead of spinning out of control or panicking. Quite often, however, we are swept away by our normal habits, and we won't interrupt those patterns even slightly. But with practice, we can learn to stay with a fear or other painful emotion. Sticking with uncertainty is how we learn to relax in the midst of chaos, how we learn to be cool when the ground beneath us suddenly disappears. We can bring ourselves back to the spiritual path countless times, every day, simply by exercising our willingness to rest in the uncertainty of the present moment. Remain with the fear over and over again. In my opinion, what Pema Chodron is sharing with her Buddhist wisdom is that when we encounter fear or any other distressing emotion, and when fight or flight aren't realistic options, we should stay with the motion. Or in the theme of this sermon, we should go with the flow of the emotion. It probably won't be easy, but we can do it. And as I've mentioned before, this too shall pass. Yes, I believe we have to go with the flow of all of life around us. But that doesn't mean we have to give up and endure whatever's in our path. If you can get to a better part of the flow, whatever the flow might be, then by all means, swim or paddle in that direction. I'd like to end with a joke. It's a serious joke, but it's still a joke nonetheless. So here goes. And before I tell you the joke, I'll tell you that the names of these individuals are my grandparents. Lillian and Adley were an old couple who lived in a 2-story house in a floodplain. They were so old they no longer drove or were very mobile whatsoever. One day, a big storm came up and they knew the floodwaters were going to rise, but they had faith that God would take care of them. Sure enough, the floodwaters started rising. Before long, the sheriff drove up and said, "Let me get y'all out of here." They declined, saying God would take care of them. Not too much later, the floodwaters filled the streets and a boat came up, and the rescuer hollered, "Let me get y'all out of here." They declined, saying God would take care of them. Well, the floodwaters continued to rise, and they climbed to the second-floor porch for safety. Soon, a helicopter came, and the rescuer yelled, "Let me get y'all out of here." They declined, saying God would take care of them. Well, guess what? They drowned. And they found themselves at the pearly gates, and God was right there. And Lillian complained, "Where were you? I had faith that you'd save us." To which God replied, "I sent a car, a boat, and a helicopter. What else could I have done?" Yes, we need to go with the flow, but we also need to work with everything that's flowing all around us. Amen and namaste.